So once you have your topic, let's talk a little bit about how to actually format your newsletter. Uh, at a macro sort of high level, there are really only three newsletter formats. And what I call them is an original format, a curated format, and a hybrid format. An original format basically means everything you send in your newsletter is content you create, right? Even if you're linking to videos or blog posts or articles or podcasts or whatever it is, everything that's going in there is something that you created. Curated is sort of the opposite of that. So yes, you're writing the newsletter, but everything you're sending, the content that you're featuring was created by someone else, right? You're curating the best stuff that's out there. Here's an article this person wrote. Here's a video this person posted. And then hybrid is a blend of the two. Any of these formats can work, but I strongly recommend a hybrid approach. And the reason I recommend that is it really gives you the best of both worlds. It allows you to provide more value in your newsletter and share more content with less effort than if you purely original. You don't have to create everything. It's much easier to sort of put it together on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. The other thing about that is it actually allows your newsletter to be better, because the truth is, no matter how much you invest in creating content, there's no way you're not the only one that can create and share interesting things, right? So the ability to tap in and curate and bring the best of the other stuff that's out there just drastically increases the value of your newsletter. And then as opposed to doing a purely curated format, if you have nothing original or nothing you've created, you're not necessarily establishing your credibility. So I like having a little bit of original stuff. For example, my newsletter, I have one original blog post that I wrote and four curated pieces. But you certainly can, if you don't have the time or resources or interest to create any of your own stuff. But just know that you might be attracting your audience, but you're not necessarily this is especially true in a service business, right? If all you're doing is sharing other people's stuff, you may grow an audience, but you're not necessarily proving your own expertise and making people ultimately want to hire you or convert into clients. So again, any of these can work. Hybrid is, I think, the best for those reasons. Another thing in terms of format is I get asked this question all the time. Let's say you do write a blog post or something. Should you put the whole thing in the newsletter, or should you share a summary and a link? I strongly recommend summaries and links as opposed to full articles. This is especially true if you're going to have multiple pieces of content in your newsletter, which you probably are in most cases. It's rare that you just have one thing you want them to read and that's it. And even if you do, that one thing probably includes some links to other stuff. There are several reasons why I recommend this approach. And so these are some of the advantages. By the way, I should say, again, you can succeed either way. So it's not that this is the only way to do it, but these are the advantages of this approach. Number one, it's easier to create, especially if you're sort of curating stuff. Like you don't feel like, oh, I have to write an essay every week. Number two, it's easier to measure interest in topics. This is a big one. Let's say that you write a blog. Let's say that you have let's say you have that logo design company and you write a blog post about how to do an audit of your, how to figure out if your current logo is working, or even better, how to figure out if it's time for a new logo, right? If you write that full essay in the email, you have no idea if your audience and who in your audience was actually interested in it. You only know if they opened it or not. You don't know if they read it. There's no clicks to track. You have no sense of their actual interest. If it's a summary and a link, you know exactly how many people clicked that and who they were. And you can compare it. So let's say your newsletter had one article about how to figure out if your logo is working, and another article about how to increase your design, what to do if you don't have a design budget, for example, right? Being able to gauge who clicked those things tells you a lot about your audience, and that's very valuable in terms of marketing to them and remarketing to them and understanding pain points of your customers. If you don't have links, you have no way of knowing who read what and what resonated with them. That goes right into the ability to segment and retarget. If you don't have links for people to click, you can't segment them to send them other stuff. You can't retarget them with other messages. It's also a traffic driver. Chances are depending what your business is, you probably want some people in your website because you want them exploring and seeing other stuff. So if you do links and get them to read the post on your website, that's going to help you more than them just reading it in your email. Also, they're way more likely to share content from your website on social media and spread the word than they are your email. They may forward it to people, but most likely they won't. So you'll get more shares if you drive them to the content on your site. And then it generates a lot of data you can use in your business. This is an example. So this is from a recent issue of my newsletter. This is the kind of data that you can get, and when you do summary link, and I'll give you some examples of how this could be valuable. So 368 people, and this was a curated article that someone else wrote that I featured. 368 people clicked it. It was about 7 tips to improve your Instagram profile for a creative business. I now know those 368 people are interested in improving their Instagram profile, or at least curious about it, and probably have creative businesses. If I had, and I don't, but if I had a service where I was offering, Instagram improvement or, Instagram consulting, that's incredibly powerful. I can reach out to each of those people as a segment. I could reach out to them individually. I can tailor my messaging to them, knowing that they're at least curious about how to improve their Instagram profile. I know they probably run creative businesses, otherwise they wouldn't have clicked it. Incredibly valuable. Another example down at the bottom was a post that I wrote on how to get coaching clients. 228 people clicked it. No one is clicking that if they don't have a coaching business and aren't trying to figure out how to get more clients. So if part of my business is helping those kind of people get that, that is incredibly powerful data. And I would not have any of it had I just put my how to get coaching clients blog post in an email and sent it without a link. I'd have no idea. I would just know that thousands of people opened my newsletter and read it, or maybe they read it, maybe they didn't. Summaries and links as opposed to full text, really valuable. A few more sort of general format tips. One, don't overcomplicate it. I think especially when people are starting out, there's a temptation that we need a fancy design, we need a custom template, we need this, that, or the other. The design is really not that important when it comes to email newsletters. Simpler is almost always better. You can always, as you go, improve it and tweak it. Don't get paralyzed and stalled trying to figure out all these elements and make it perfect. Just start sending it and see what happens. My newsletter is very minimally designed. I literally have a logo at the top, and beyond that, it's basically a text newsletter. I bold headlines, and that's about it. And it's fine. It hasn't hurt me at all. And there's also a case to be made that the more complicated and more images and more designed your email, the more likely it is to get flagged by spam filters, because they see that as sort of brand company marketing and less personal. So in general, again, there's nothing wrong with having a nice design, but I wouldn't overrate its importance. If you send a newsletter, it's great to encourage people to reply, ask them a question. But if they do reply, don't ignore those replies. It seems obvious, but lots of people do. And it does the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. It damages your brand and makes people think that you don't really care. So, and if for whatever reason you feel like you're not going to be able to reply ever, then don't ask for replies. You don't have to tell people don't reply. Some still will, but every once in a while you'll see someone that's like asking a question and then people respond and they don't even acknowledge it. Not a smart move. In general, and again, this is a little bit case by case, but in general, sending a newsletter from a person or an individual as opposed to sending it from the generic brand is better. My newsletter is named For the Interested, but it comes from the name. What shows up in their inbox is an email from Josh Spector. Again, I'll use the clothing brand example. It's going to be more interesting to have a newsletter from the brand's CEO or chief designer than it is just the brand in general. This isn't the end of the world, and sometimes, depending on the circumstance, you have to send it from the brand, and that's okay. It's not going to kill you, but there are advantages to send from an individual. You see this a lot now over the past few years. It kind of started with the Obama campaign, but people have put together that you're going to get a lot more opens when people get an email from Barack Obama than when they get an email from the Obama campaign. So just something to keep in mind. And you'll see those campaigns like, sending from different people. You might get an email from Barack Obama or George Clooney, or, these emails will come from individuals that are going to lead to way more opens than sort of a generic, in that case, campaign. But the same goes for a brand, right? Let's say that, I think Serena Williams is with Nike, but let's say Serena Williams was, they were promoting some new product. Are you going to be more likely to open an email from Serena Williams or Nike, right? More likely to open it from Serena. Frequency, I get asked this a lot. The most important thing is whatever you choose, be consistent. So if you don't think you can send weekly, don't choose weekly. You can always increase the frequency. But you want to do something that you can reliably keep up with. And you always want to send at the same day and time, right? You want to try to become a habit for people. And you can't do that if sometimes I send on Monday and then 2 weeks later I send on Thursday and then 3 days later I send on Wednesday. Like that's not gonna, that's not gonna help you. I also think in general, because your goal with frequency is to become a habit, that's why I recommend sending at least twice a month. I don't think you can really, it's not the end of the world if you send monthly or less frequently, but it's tough to become a habit if you're only sending once a month. It's too infrequent. A quick story about this. I send every Sunday morning at 6 a.m. And there was 1 week where there was a glitch and it didn't go out. And around 10 o'clock Sunday morning or whatever, I had all these emails from people saying, hey, where's the newsletter? And it was super eye-opening to me. And I'd have emails like, and what I realized was, because I so consistently sent at that time, people had incorporated it into their other habits, right? So they were like, every Sunday morning I have my coffee and relax and read your newsletter. So they actually missed it. That there's no way that happens if I wasn't consistently sending at the same time. So that's really valuable. It also helps you in the creation to sort of get into a flow of when you're sending it. The other thing I would say is that in general, it's better to have, actually, before I say this, one other note about sending time. People ask when is the best time to send. It doesn't matter that much, but the way I would think about it is, are you sending a newsletter that people are likely to read at work or not, right? So that's sort of the first component. If they're likely to read it at work, then I'd probably send it on a weekday. If it's the kind of thing that they're likely to read not at work, then I would send it on a weekend, or maybe send it late in the day if you think it's the kind of thing they're going to read at night. Specific day and time doesn't really matter that much, although I would align with where most of your audience is. But I think the biggest consideration is this the kind of thing someone's going to read at work or not? And then adjust accordingly. It's better to have shorter, more frequent newsletters than longer, less frequent. So if you told me that your newsletter was going to feature 4 items each time, and because of what it takes to put it together or whatever, that you could only send it once every 2 weeks, I would probably suggest split it. I'd rather send 2 items once a week than 4 items once every 2 weeks, right? Shorter, more frequent in general is better than longer, less frequent. One other note about this, your newsletter doesn't have to be a real-time newsletter. And what I mean, depending on your topic and how you choose to approach this, you might decide that every new subscriber always starts with issue one, and you just plan these out. You think of it more almost like a drip campaign, and so the advantage of this is every time everyone's going to see all the stuff that you sent, as opposed to someone who subscribes now and someone who subscribes to my newsletter now has missed 286 issues. They're on my site and they could go back, but hypothetically, I could start them at issue one, and I have 286 scheduled, and they just go through it. So I don't necessarily recommend this, although in some cases it can work and is a possibility. So that's why I mention it, because it is something to consider. The advantage obviously is it can be less work and you can plan ahead and that kind of thing. The disadvantage is if you're not sending real time and you do have sort of real time messaging you want to get in, you kind of can't reach everybody because everybody's at a different stage of getting the newsletter. So in most cases, it's not the best approach, but there may be times where it fits. Like, I don't know that he does this for sure, but well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know that he does, but I was going to say, like, author Ryan Holiday has a newsletter called The Daily Stoic. That stuff is all super timeless, so he could very easily just start people with issue one. I don't know that it matters that people are getting the same message at the same time. Let's talk a little bit about how to create content. Timeless versus time sensitive. Again, this is going to depend on your topic, your audience, and what you're trying to do. In general, I recommend selecting content that is basically timeless and evergreen, right? So advice, for example, in my newsletter, which is aimed at creators and people who want to grow their audience and business, when I share stuff related to social media, I don't ever share an article about Twitter rolled out this new feature, because the value of that kind of newsy stuff is very short, right? So instead, I might share something about here's how to write a powerful tweet, because that advice is going to be valuable years from now, not just in the moment. So in most cases, again, it depends, not all cases, but in most cases, if you lean into stuff that's more evergreen, that's going to be more valuable than the time sensitive stuff. And it gives you more time to reap its value, even in terms of repurposing, which we'll talk about in a minute. Answering common questions, a really easy way to create content. If you're just starting out, you can sit down and make a list of 20 questions that people ask you all the time. Your answers to each of them is a piece of content. Just start paying attention to what people want to know, and all of that can fuel your content. Repurposing social media content and vice versa. So if you're already doing any kind of posts on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, it's very easy to just take that same stuff and put it in your newsletter. Most of your social followers have not seen it because of the algorithms. And most of your newsletter subscribers have not seen it because maybe they don't follow you on social. So repurpose that content. I also think there's a huge opportunity to use the newsletter as an engine for your social media content. So, for example, if I have a newsletter where I share 5 articles or 5 things each week, that could very easily be 5 social posts. So depending, you may want to actually start thinking about your newsletter as the engine. That's where you first create the content, and then you repurpose each of them into each individual piece of content onto social media. And when you do this, either way, the repurposing, it makes the time and investment you're putting into creating content much more effective and much more efficient. One other note about creating content, a lot of times when people are hesitant to do newsletters, it's because they don't really love writing or don't want to deal with written content. Your newsletter doesn't have to be written content. If you prefer to make videos or do podcasts, your newsletter could be as simple as, hey, here's my new video about blah, blah, blah. So don't feel like a newsletter has to be a certain thing. Again, this goes back to, I think, something I said in the last session, that, a newsletter is just a value delivery mechanism, right? You can share whatever form of content you want through it. Curating content. So we just talked about how to create stuff. This is some tips on how to find stuff to feature. In general, you're going to be better off following curators, not publications. So other newsletters in your space are a fantastic source. Thought leaders. If you're following people on social media, following an individual journalist is better than following the publication. Because these curators have already gone through and found the best stuff. So they're going to save you a lot of time because it's another layer deeper, as opposed to if you follow the New York Times, for example, you're going to see every New York Times article. But, if you do something related to healthcare, let's say, like, you don't care about all that other stuff. You just care about the healthcare stuff. So go follow their healthcare reporters. Google News search and alerts makes it super easy. You can do Google search, but in general, I like Google News search because that's going to show you new stuff literally like every day and every week. And you can set up alerts to have that delivered to you by email every day or every week. All you have to do is enter in terms related to your business, and they'll surface stuff that you otherwise never would have seen. Twitter search is also really powerful. Again, you can search for specific keywords or phrases and find anybody that's tweeting about those things. Then sites like Reddit, Quora, where people submit questions and people answer them. Medium is a blogging platform. All of those, again, they're all sources that, either based on voting mechanisms or editorial or algorithms, are surfacing the most interesting stuff. So you really want to, just like with the curators, you want to leverage people who have already done the initial searching for you, and then pick the best of the best to feature in your stuff. And then the last one here is you can always ask your audience, especially if you have an existing audience that you have a connection to, invite them to share stuff that they've found interesting, helpful. It's a great thing to do also if you have a Facebook group or communities already. Let them share stuff they've created. Let them share stuff that they found interesting. You can then credit them in your newsletter. It's great for relationship building, and they can help you find really good, relevant stuff. Talk a little bit about naming your newsletter here. Again, it's going to be a little different in every case, but in general, you want to go with clear, not clever. A lot of times people come up with almost the equivalent of like an inside joke or sort of inside baseball name. And, you want a name that anyone who's in your potential target audience will instantly know, oh, that's for me. That's relevant to me. And if you get too clever, that doesn't happen, right? You don't want a name that your potential audience doesn't know what it's about. Your newsletter name, not necessarily your brand name. In most cases, it won't be. It's not going to be the Acme widget newsletter. It's going to be the widget manufacturing newsletter or something like that. The big thing, again, with the name is ask yourself, is this a name that will interest people who don't know you already exist? The key is you're trying to remember you're doing this in part to bring in a new audience and to grow your audience, not just about the people who already know you. So if you pick a name that resonates with them, or that's understood by people who don't know you, they're going to be way more likely to check it out, as opposed to a name that doesn't mean anything to them. And that's also what I mean by a name that reflects your audience. Again, simple. If I was doing a newsletter about podcast growth, the difference between calling my newsletter the downloader and calling it the podcast growth newsletter is massive. Anyone that has a podcast and wants to grow and sees the podcast growth newsletter is going to at least check it out. They see the downloader, they don't really know what that is. The downloader might be a more creative, more clever name. It won't be more effective. So I wanted to give you, again, there's sort of infinite formats, and you certainly can and will create your own based on some of the stuff that I've suggested. But I wanted to give you two simple formats that you can steal. You can pick one of these and go, I'm going to do this, and be up and running tomorrow, literally, if you wanted to. The first I'm calling the FTI format. It's my for the interested format, basically. Really simple. You start with an intro paragraph, not more than a couple sentences. You then include 5 summaries and links. Like, so in mine, the first is the original blog post that I wrote. The other 4 are curated links to articles or videos or podcasts. Each one is just a headline, a sentence or 2 describing it in a link. And then I have a final thought paragraph. I call mine my final words of the week, but basically it's sort of a free-for-all paragraph at the bottom. I think it's helpful often to have sort of a free space that you can insert things that you may want to promote, or maybe you want to reference something else, or maybe you want to ask people a question. It's sort of this kind of free wildcard paragraph at the end that you can use for whatever you want. Examples of this format is my For the Interested newsletter, Scalable, which you guys may be familiar with. They have used a similar format, which I helped them get going, and has worked really well for them. It's a great newsletter, by the way. I do recommend subscribing to that if you haven't. The other one I'm calling the 1+1+1 format. Very simple. You pick one thing that you created to share, one thing that you found or are curating to share, and then one wild card. The wild card could be, for example, a Q&A, a relevant quote, an interview, a picture, a survey. Could be whatever you want. Could be the same thing every time. Could be a different thing every time. It really just sort of depends. This format's used, a version of this format's used by a lot of different people. James Clear's 321 newsletter is sort of like this. Each issue includes 3 short ideas from him, 2 quotes from others, 1 question for you to ponder. Very simple. But whatever format you choose, whether you use one of these or another, I do recommend a consistent format, so you're just plugging in the holes as opposed to sort of reinventing the wheel with each issue. So your homework in terms of a next step would be to pick a format, either use one of these 2 or your own, and outline a sample issue. I think we have a worksheet that you guys can literally fill in the blanks with the 2 formats that I talked about here.